She said, "You're so lucky to have met my friends because you're not on their level. Just pay and leave." I replied, "You're right." They all laughed while I quietly walked away. A week later, her once smug smile vanished instantly when she found out I had become the boss of her friends. I didn't plan some movie scene that night. I just wanted air. I handed my card to the host, signed a receipt with a pen that was running out, and stepped into the noise of the street. It was one of those early spring nights where the wind still has winter in it. The glass front of the restaurant reflected me for a second. Then a couple pushed through the door, and the image broke. I remember thinking, all right, that's that. In the rideshare home, the driver hummed along to the radio. I stared at the little blue dot on the map and felt weirdly calm. No monologue, no speeches, just this simple thought. If someone will mock you for sport, they will do it again. I got home, tossed my keys into the bowl, and stood in the kitchen with the light off. It felt quieter than usual. I pulled out my phone, typed a message, deleted it, then put the phone face down. I wasn't going to beg a crowd to be kind. I was done. I slept on the couch on purpose. I wanted the stiffness the next morning to mark the change. At 6:11 a.m., because I checked, I made coffee that tasted a little burnt and opened my laptop. Blank doc. 3 lines at the top like headers. Person I'm becoming. Work that actually matters. Boundaries I won't argue about. Under the first, I wrote a few things that made me wince. Be on time. Lift more than you talk. Learn to present without gripping the table. Under the second, I listed projects I had avoided. The messy cross-team stuff no one volunteers for. Under the third, I wrote a single sentence. I don't stay where I am, turned into a joke. I didn't announce any of this. No inspirational post, no revenge playlist. I just changed what my days looked like. At work, I asked for backlog items that had been sitting. One of them was a client integration with mismatched spreadsheets and a folder full of PDFs that looked like they were scanned by a toaster. I said I'd take it. I started coming in a bit earlier, not to impress anyone, but because the quiet between 7:30 and 9 does more than caffeine. Week 1 felt clumsy. I mixed up 2 vendor IDs and had to fix my own mistake. I wrote an email too long and rewrote it shorter. I started blocking my calendar in ugly little chunks with names like follow up, no excuses, and call Sam. He knows the billing trap. Now, I practiced speaking through a roadmap out loud when nobody was around. I took notes on sticky notes and then forced myself to type them up because sticky notes disappear. By week 3, the metrics on that integration stopped looking like a heart monitor. People stopped chasing me for updates because I sent them before they could ask. I wasn't suddenly brilliant. I was just boring in a good way. If you've ever closed out 3 small tasks in a row, you know the little jolt you get. It stacks. It changes how you walk into rooms. Then the email hit. Subject line, heads up, partnership. Our division was bringing in a boutique creative firm. Their deck was glossy, ours was stable. They had charming brainstorms. We had calendars and checklists. Somebody needed to translate. The director said my name without a question mark at the end, which is how I knew it wasn't a suggestion. When their team arrived, it was noise. New Slack channels, new acronyms, new opinions about tools. Day 1, I stood in a conference room with a dry erase marker that didn't work, which felt on brand. I swapped it for a short one that left ink on my fingers. While I talked, I noticed 2 faces in the back. I knew them. The same laughter from that restaurant hovered behind my ribs like an echo that didn't belong to the room we were in. I didn't look away, and I didn't look at them again either. I just laid out the next 2 weeks the way you lay out a kitchen counter before you cook. Ingredients, order, heat, time. Integration work is not heroic. You rename files, you pick one naming convention and stick to it. You make it slightly harder to start new work and slightly easier to finish the work already on the table. You say things like, if everything is a priority, then nothing is, and you mean it even when your voice shakes a bit. You decline meetings with no agenda and send a paragraph instead. It is not sexy, and it is not a TED Talk. It is just the behavior that makes results not optional. Within days, I got the unglamorous power people actually feel. I controlled the intake. I set the sprint length. I decided what got staffed and when. On paper, they called me interim program lead. In practice, it meant if your request was unclear, it waited. If it was clear, it moved. The two friends from that night learned this the same way everyone else did. They submitted a request. It lacked a definition of done. It came back to them with a note. Not a dig, a note. I could see their surprise in the hallway later. Not anger exactly, more like recalibration. A clock being set. In between all that, I kept doing the small things. I saved a checklist template to a shared folder and added a goofy file name so people would actually click it. I asked a quiet analyst to present one slide because her spreadsheet had the only numbers I trusted. I wrote a line on a sticky note that just said, "Ask before fixing." I forgot it on my monitor where anyone could see, which turned out to be better. A week into the merger, the director forwarded the official title update. That word, boss, lands different when you are the one suddenly responsible for removing roadblocks instead of just complaining about them. I didn't celebrate. I went for a walk around the block, bought a banana and a small chocolate milk from the corner bodega, stood on the curb, and let my phone buzz in my pocket without checking it. I know that sounds dramatic. It wasn't. It was just me making sure the title sat behind the work instead of in front of it. There was a moment, and I'll be honest, it did feel personal for a second. I walked into a cross-team review, and one of those friends looked up at the screen and then at me, and I watched her expression step through surprise into something like respect, or maybe just recognition. No satisfaction hit me the way I thought it might. I didn't get the rush, got a kind of quiet, like putting down a bag you didn't realize you were carrying. Not everything went smoothly. I approved a pilot too fast and spent 2 late nights helping unwind it. I wrote a policy that needed to be rewritten because the wording was smug. I said sorry without the fake half joke. People notice that kind of thing more than they notice speeches. Also, I asked for help. From a guy on the finance side who hates meetings, and from a project manager who can sense scope creep like a dog hearing a whistle. When they delivered, I said thank you with specifics. What they did, why it mattered, who I told about it. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I got a message from my ex. It was polite. Hope you're well. Heard about the new role. Coffee sometime. I looked at it for a minute the way you look at an old photograph in a drawer. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance, the healthy kind. I replied a day later with thanks and the truth. Schedule is packed right now. Wishing you the best. No dots, no bait, no maybe. I closed the chat and went back to a deck that actually needed me. Numbers started to move. Average start time per project dropped by 4 days. Missed handoffs went from often to rare. A client who usually writes vague emails started using the intake form properly. If you're not in operations, this sounds incredibly boring. If you are, you know this is winning. People stopped saying good job loudly and just did their jobs better, which is a different kind of praise. There was a larger review a week later. Think long table clicker that keeps slipping out of your hand, a projector that runs a few degrees too hot. I kept the talk short. What we shipped, what we learned, where we fumbled, what we will stop doing. I left room for questions. Someone asked about how we decide who gets priority. I answered the way I wish someone had answered me 2 years ago. Clear value, ready teammates, honest estimate. If those aren't present, it waits. I saw heads nod from people who usually look at their phones. In the back, my ex stood with her friend and a client contact. For a half second, our eyes almost met. Then, a teammate asked me something about the Q3 timeline, and the moment turned into just another moving part of the day. I walked out of that room and realized I hadn't thought once about the restaurant or the line that ended us, not until right then. The memory felt small, not erased, just resized. That night, I opened the old document again. Person I'm becoming. Work that matters. Boundaries I won't argue about. I added a fourth header. The company I keep. I wrote a few names. People who send calendar invites with an agenda. People who do not laugh at someone else's expense and call it banter. People who will tell you quietly that your slide is confusing and help you fix it. I put the file away without renaming it something inspirational. It lives in a boring folder where I will actually find it. If you're waiting for me to say I won, that's not the point. There wasn't a scoreboard. There was just a table I no longer sit at and a seat I earned in a room where my voice does something useful. The so-called revenge was not a reveal. It was a pile of little choices that hardened into a different life. It's paying attention to your calendar, like it's a promise. It's leaving places that shrink you and building habits that don't. Do I wish I had said something clever that night at the restaurant? Not really. Clever lines age poorly. What lasts is what you do with the quiet afterward. Mine looked like waking up earlier, asking better questions, messing up and fixing it in daylight, and learning to be a little less dramatic in rooms that reward drama. If there's a moral here, it's boring and durable. Choose dignity when no one is clapping. Do the useful thing next. Keep going when it stops being exciting. Eventually, someone will ask when you changed. You won't have an exact date. You'll just have a life that fits. And yes, a week later, titles changed. A few people who once smirked needed something from me, and I gave them the same thing I give everyone else now. Clarity, fair cues, deadlines we can stand behind. That's what power is supposed to look like. Not a speech, not a scene, just work that holds. If this sounds like advice, maybe it is. Write your own 3 lines. Or 4. Fail in public without hiding. Choose people who treat respect like a default setting, not a prize. The loudest part of your story does not have to be the moment you were mocked. It can be the part where you quietly got good at things that matter and let the room adjust. That's how her smile vanished, by the way. Not because I told a crowd what she said, because the room no longer needed her opinion to function, and neither did I. That silence is the only revenge I recommend.